Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the recording of the 2026-2028 FLSA Qualified Overtime Session presented by the Meta Fiscal staff. This session is being recorded today, December 22nd, and it is replacing the session that was held Thursday, December 18th. The Meta Fiscal staff has updated information. We've received updated information, and some of the questions that we had have been answered by the SSDT, as well as some updated documentation. So we feel it best to serve our districts, end users, and payroll processors to record the session over. Okay. So beginning January 1st of 2026, employers are required to track and report qualified overtime compensation to non-exempt employees. Employees can then deduct this qualified overtime up to $12,500 for those who are filing status as single, or $25,000 for those filing their return jointly when filing their federal income tax. This information will print on the employee's W-2 in box 12 with a code of TT. Further details regarding the specifics of this bill can be found on the SSDT's website and also on the IRS newsroom called One Big Beautiful Bill. There's also been an addition to the Wiki underneath the useful procedures. Hold on a second. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So under the Wiki then, under the useful procedures, there is a reporting overtime under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And it goes through and it explains some of the information that we're going to go over today. I'll be referencing back to this as we proceed. And also, there's a section in here at the end for questions and answers that the SSDT has gone through. And some of the most common questions, they've come up with answers and posted them in this document. So I'll be going over those after I go through some of these other fields. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is basically go over how do you report the calendar 2025 overtime. In August, the IRS stated that the W-2s for the tax year 2025 would not change in order to make the overtime and the tip calculation easier for employers. And 2025 would be treated as a transition year, which means that there's going to be no penalties. The IRS issued guidance in November related to the penalty relief. In the memo, the IRS stated that box 14 can be used to report qualified overtime, which is QOT for 2025. The only way to get overtime reported for your 2025 W-2s is to do a core adjustment. If we go into payroll here, and I'm going to go down to core and adjustments, and I'm going to create a core adjustment for an employee. And that core adjustment is on the federal tax record. So I have to select the federal tax payroll item. Oops. And then go all the way down to the bottom, and you see W-2 overtime reporting. So that's the type of adjustment that I'm making. The date that you enter needs to be in 2025. And then you have to manually calculate and put in the overtime that you're going to report. Now, remember, this overtime amount is only the half portion of any hours over 40. This is according to the FLSA requirements. So it's only the amount. So if an employee comes in and says, hey, I have $10,000 of overtime. Well, that's not what is going to be reported, and they need to understand that that is not what is going to show on their W-2. It's only the half portion, the over and above, that is considered what they call qualified overtime. I can put in some type of a description here if I wanted to. So I can calendar year 2025 qualified overtime. And then as for these check marks, you can leave them all the same, but it's only going to affect the year-to-date W-2. So I'm going to just check the year-to-date, and I'm going to click on Save. So now I have my adjustment here for Billy King for the qualified overtime. Don't get confused with two of them being in here. I did a test earlier for this, and I evidently forgot to remove one. But anyways, that's how you would report the 2025 overtime for those employees. If you have anybody that comes in and wants those on their W-2, it's going to be up to the district of how they want to handle that. You can tell them go back over their pay stubs or whatever, but if you want to enter the adjustments, you can. All right, so now we're going to move on to calendar year 2026. Starting with your first January 2026 payroll, do not use the pay type of miscellaneous pay for overtime that's related pay amounts or earnings for any overtime pay that is considered their premium overtime or pay that needs to be reported on the W-2. So basically, you can still use miscellaneous pay to pay overtime if that's how you pay overtime for hours or wages that don't add up to over 40 hours, or pay that you want to pay for an employee that gets extra pay for, and it's not considered overtime. If you pay any type of overtime that is required to be reported on the employee's W-2, that has to be an overtime pay type or a blended overtime pay type. You'll need to enter the adjustments through core adjustments when processing your W-2s if you don't enter those two types of pay for 2026. We're giving you this information now, so hopefully that when it comes time for doing your W-2s for 2026, you will not have to do any type of core adjustments to make that overtime rate amounts be correct. One thing I did want to mention, and I forgot to mention, is once you do these core adjustments for 2025, I'm going to go ahead and run a W-2 report here real quick, just to show you how those will report on the W-2 report. Okay, so for Billy King, you can see here on the screen that it has this qualified overtime of $500 because I had it in there twice, but that's what it will show on the employee on your W-2 report. And also, if you look at the bottom of the report for your report totals, it's going to have a qualified overtime total for all of your employees. So if you're keeping track of those through a spreadsheet and you have a total dollar amount of how much you think should be on your W-2s, you can balance to that figure with your report. Okay, so then back to the 2026 items for the core adjustments. You'll only need to do these core adjustments again if you do not enter the pay as overtime or blended overtime. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to go over is a new field that's on the position record. There is a new field that's called overtime calculation. So if I go to core and position, and I pull up this one person here, I'm just going to select the first one that is on my list. This overtime classification is marked here at the top of the record, and it has the options of being exempt or non-exempt. If the position is exempt from overtime reporting, then you mark this as exempt. If it's non-exempt, then you mark it as non-exempt. These flags do not need to be filled in prior to doing your first W-2 or first payroll of 2026. But to assure that the 2026 W-2 is reported correctly, those flags need to be set, and it's strongly recommended that you get these values set as soon as possible. If the value is not set prior to your first payroll in January, you'll need to make sure that the overtime, the FLSA overtime value when paying the overtime is set correctly. And I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes. This overtime classification identifies if the employee is exempt or not exempt for overtime. And also, once this flag gets set, then it will default to this, whatever is reported here, whatever you set it to when you go to pay overtime or not, or blended overtime. The SSDT has come up with 2 mass change features that you can use. There is a mass change for mass changing your employees to exempt, and a mass change to changing the classification to non-exempt. Now, these 2 are going to change whoever is on your grid at that time. It works the same as any other mass change. So you're going to be needing to do some filters here because you don't want to change everybody as exempt or everybody as non-exempt. If you only have a handful of people that are non-exempt, you could change everybody to exempt and then manually change those few to non-exempt. It is up to you how you actually want to modify these and change these. We can say, okay, all my custodian staff are going to be non-exempt. So I can put in here custodians, and then I can do my mass change down here, and I'm going to be their non-exempt. So then it has changed them here to non-exempt. Also, once you start working with this and you have your employees in this position grid, there is the ability to add this flag to your grid. If you go to the more and then scroll down to the overtime classification, you'll see an overtime classification and check mark that box. That will add the overtime classification to your position grid. So you can filter by if those that don't have it set, those that are blank, those that are exempt, and things like that if you want to. Also, if you want to go person by person, you can do that as well and just change that flag. Okay. After the field has been updated, I mentioned before, when you're paying that overtime or blended overtime in future or current, then it's going to default to whatever is on the position screen. Along with the mass change, there's also the ability to mass load your staff. So you can basically come in here and anybody, let's say if you want to, you've made some corrections or you've made some classifications and you just want to see anybody else that's non-exempt or, oops, let's get rid of that folder, exempt, you can export this to an Excel spreadsheet. I can create a report here, and then I am going to select the field names and do an Excel field names and generate a report. And then this will put in there the information that is needed for you to use for your mass load. Now in the there is a release that we had for release nodes. I thought I had it on here. Just a second. Sorry for the scrolling. If you want to use this mass load, you need to make sure you have the employee number, the employee position number, retirement code, and then overtime classification. Those are the required fields that you have to have on in your spreadsheet to use the mass load. Okay. So once we have those flags set, or if you're going to be doing your first pay in January and they're not set, we're going to work on now is how do you report overtime for a regular overtime per employee? Okay. So basically we're saying that this employee works a normal 40-hour work week, and then they had hours over and above those 40. Now remember that the W-2 reportable amount is only that half-time portion that's on the W-2. One thing I want to mention here about double time, if you pay double time for any reason, it's still only the half rate for that pay that is going to be reported on the W-2. So let's say, for example, an employee normally works or earns $20 an hour, and their regular overtime would be $30 an hour. That would be $20 times time and a half. Only $10 of that is counted for FLSA. So it's only the halftime portion. So if you're doing double time, they're earning $40 an hour, which would be their $20 times 2. But the deductible portion then is only still going to be that $10, which would be the half time and a half rate of that half rate that that person gets. Okay. So we have an employee, take for an example, a custodian, they work 40 hours and they have 5 hours of overtime. So when I'm going into payroll and I'm going to create this record, and I have my William Stewart here, and he's a custodian, I'm going to pay him overtime, and I'm going to give him 5 units of overtime. Now, notice that as soon as I hit this overtime rate, the rate is his time and a half rate. It automatically gets filled in at time and a half. If you don't want to pay the time and a half, you can change that rate, but it automatically fills that in. Then also too, because I have the flag on his position record set to non-exempt, it's going to include this amount to be included for the W-2. Now, this is just straight regular overtime pay. And what's going to happen then is you notice that I'm not breaking it out into 2 records or anything like that. I'm just paying my straight overtime 5 units at $37.50. And it's going to be included for W-2s. When the time comes that you run your W-2 report, the system is going to be able to calculate what is the half portion of this pay based on the overtime pay type, based on this being included, and based on this rate. Okay. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind, because as you go forward, if you pay somebody overtime, but it's not time and a half and it's included, then it's not going to calculate the correct amount. So in that case, if I want to pay overtime and it's not time and a half, I want to make sure that I am going to change this to be a miscellaneous pay. Or you can change the rate in the units to make it forced to be the same amount as a time and a half amount. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is the description. Okay, when you get into the case where we're going to go over in just a few minutes, the blended overtime rate, where we're in regular overtime rate that's not included and things like that, sometimes the pay stub is going to look kind of confusing to the employee. So we recommend that you change this description to be more descriptive, like this is going to be FLSA qualified overtime. And let's say it was hours worked on 2-3 and 2-4 and 2-5. Okay. Something that's going to make sense to the employee and also you when they're looking at the report, and also when you're looking at or their pay stubs, and also when you're looking at report. Okay. Now, again, like I said, this is being included. I don't have to change this, but I could if I wanted to. But I'm going to leave it included. Now, one other thing I want to mention is a lot of you, when you don't use overtime accounts in USAS, and let's say that you budget to the salary level and that's it, and you don't have overtime pay accounts, using this overtime pay type as overtime, it will automatically charge an overtime account depending on how your configuration is set in the system. If I don't want it to pay and charge that overtime, I can change the account here at the bottom. So I can put the employee's regular salary account that this overtime pay is going to be charged to if you don't want it charged to an overtime account. Okay, so that is available to be changed there. So if I go ahead and save this, then this overtime is going to be to be paid. And then it's going to be marked and it's going to be pulling in for the W-2 for 2026. Okay. Now let's take for an example, an employee that gets paid. Some of you might not consider it overtime. It's just extra time, but they don't work 40 hours. So in that situation, if I'm going to pay somebody as cafeteria worker, and let's say they only work 4 hours a day, but they put in 2 hours of overtime or extra pay. It's up to you of how you enter it. Okay. I'm going to start out with saying, okay, this is overtime because I want it to show as an overtime charge to my overtime accounts. I'm the type of person that when I'm doing my budgets and things like that, I want to know exactly how much over and above the contract is that we paid for their overtime. So I'm going to use overtime. But in this case, this person is getting 2 hours, but they're not getting time and a half. So I'm going to change the rate to be straight time. And then I'm going to exclude it because this person did not work 40 hours. So I'm excluding this overtime pay. All right. So doing it this way then is going to charge my overtime accounts the way I want to keep it to look when I'm doing budgeting and things. It's going to pay their straight time at 2 hours and it's going to be excluded from their W-2. The other way that you can do this is instead of doing overtime, you can mark this as a miscellaneous pay. Okay. And then I'm going to put in, this is extra hours worked on 12/4. So that is another way to do it. You notice that whenever I changed it from overtime to miscellaneous, I don't have the option. Oh, you're not supposed to have the option to include it or exclude it from the pay, because this FLSA overtime just has to do with overtime and blended overtime rates. So that is another way to report it. A lot of things that we've talked about and we're going to get show you and things like that. You might say, well, our negotiated agreement has this, or we do this and we do it differently, or our pay starts in the middle of the week and things like that. We're not saying that any of those procedures or the way that you change or pay those employees is going to be changing. Everything that you're going to do up to that point is going to be the same. This is just showing you how to get it in the system to report it on the W-2. Okay. All right. So then the next option is the blended over rate. Okay. Both current and future have been updated with the new pay type of blended overtime rate. You would use blended overtime rate if you have an employee that has, let's say, a position 1 is a custodian. Position 2 is an aide that they come in and work. Let's say they work custodian second shift and they work another position in the morning. And both of those positions have different rates, hourly rates, and then they have overtime. So then at that point, then you have to calculate a blended rate. All right. And then according to the FLSA, when I'm doing a blended rate, once I have it calculated, and I'm not going to show you how to calculate a blended rate because that can get really, really confusing. The SSDT has information out in their documentation. If you go to payments future under blended rate, here's some information about how to calculate those. If you have blended rates or you do pay blended rates, you probably already have a worksheet that you're using to calculate that amount. Also, the SSDT is going to be coming out with a worksheet that's going to be available to help you calculate these blended rates. But once you have the blended rate calculated, only that half portion of the blended rate is going to be reported for the FLSA. So once you have that created and figured out, when I go in to put this person's on here, let's say this person is a secretary and a driver, and it doesn't really matter which position you put it on. I'm going to do a blended rate here. In this example, I'm going to have 5 units, and the blended rate that I came up with is going to be $10.84, and then I'm going to include it. Okay, so then on this description, I'm going to FLSA blended overtime rate for 12/4 or whatever date that they put in that overtime rate. The other portion of the overtime rate that you're going to put in would be a miscellaneous pay. Because remember, this is only the half portion of the pay, so they're only going to get $54.20. Well, you still owe them for the straight time of overtime that they worked. So those entries then would be put in as a miscellaneous pay. Okay, we do know that there is one issue. If you go back into an overtime item and edit it, this included or excluded box is not, we can't change it. Okay, so we have a couple of workarounds for it. If you go to the eyeball first to view the record and then go to edit, then we can change it. Or the other thing is change the pay type to doc or miscellaneous or something else, then change it back, and then we can change it. SSDT does know about this, and they're working on a correction for this. But if you have to get off of the screen when you're paying it and you have to go back and make changes, then you can do it by viewing the record first and then modifying it. That's the easiest way to do. Okay, one of the other things that I wanted to mention is if you use, I'm going to go here to the mass load option for absences and attendance. If you import your absences and attendances and you pay from that import, there is a new column that you can add to your spreadsheets. In column Z, the field name is FLSAOT, and the values are either T or F or true or false. So if you're using that load, then you can go ahead and add those to your spreadsheets to load. Now, it's not going to look at anything in column Z unless the pay type in your load sheet is overtime or blended overtime. Before I start going over the documentation from that's in the wiki under the appendix for useful procedures, I just wanted to mention that the meta staff, support staff, we do not give legal advice. Okay, none of the information that we shared in this video is intended to be legal advice, and it's not intended to be used as such. We recommend that you check with legal counsel on any type of questions that you may have, as far as maybe who's exempt and who's not exempt, different things like that. Also, OASVO is also a good place to go to get legal or financial advisors, so they have those on staff so they can interpret your questions and give you those kind of answers. Okay, so this documentation here, and again, this is under the appendix under useful procedures, and it is called the reporting overtime under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. One of the things that the SSDT puts right here at the top of the document is it's a work in progress. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, it is a work in progress because right after we did our presentation on the Thursday, changes were made to this documentation. Also, you can see changes were made to this documentation just today as well. All right, so again, a lot of things that is at the top of this is just tells you information about what this is for and how it's used. And I've already covered a lot of those things. How do you enter your future and pay and things like that? This is a nice little table that they have added to this document. And what happens if on the position screen it's blank? And it's blank on the payroll future. You went ahead and added that pay and it's blank. Is it going to be printed on the W-2? In this situation, yes, it is. Okay, so it just gives you a little bit of an overview here of what happens if that is done when you're paying those pays. Okay, let's take, for example, then you did a first pay in January and both of these fields were blank. And it's going to be reported on the W-2, but you don't want it to be reported on the W-2, or vice versa. It was not marked as being reported on the W-2, but you want it to be. In those situations, you will have to do a core adjustment for 2026. There's no way to go back and change anything that has been paid to get it to market to W-2s going forward. Okay, so the first question here, can the FLSA overtime column be added to the payroll payments future? Yes, it can. So if I'm here and I'm on payroll future, this FLSA overtime, it's a flag here at the bottom. You can go ahead and mark this, and then it will be included in your grid. Okay. Can the overtime classification column be added to the positions grid? Yes, it can. It's under more, and the heading is overtime classifications. I went over this and checked that and showed you how you can add that to the position grid as well. Can the mass change be used to update the position overtime classification fields? Yes, it can. You can use the mass change. These are the two mass change procedures that are available. If you don't have these procedures already loaded, I know we loaded some from the video from Thursday, but if you want these mass change things to be added to your position grid, put in a help desk ticket and we'll get them added for you. Can mass load be used to update the position overtime classification field? Yes, mass load can. I mentioned this before, you can use a spreadsheet to load. Here are the required fields that have to be in there in your grid before you export it to the spreadsheet, and then you can import it and it will change those for you. Is there a default overtime classification value on position record? And what does a blank value mean, exempt or non-exempt? No, there's not a default overtime classification value on the position record. Each position record should have the value set accordingly. The overtime classification can be set by going into the position. A blank value is treated as non-exempt. So basically what we think is, yes, that means it's a default. If it's blank, it's going to be defaulted to non-exempt. And this is one of the things that we have sent up to the SSDT to get clarification on, and we haven't heard back from this yet. But we feel that if it's blank, it's going to default to non-exempt. Position templates can be used to create overtime classifications. For example, a template can be created with the overtime classification set to exempt and another one to non-exempt. This is for if you are using employees, when you add employees and you have templates already created for position screens. So when you're adding a new employee, you use a specific template for a sub, let's say, or a template for a bus driver, a template for a custodian, or whatever. You have templates already created. You might want to go in and break those templates out, or add and modify those templates to add this field. Are they exempt or not exempt? Depending on whatever position you're adding, you can go ahead and change your templates to one of those two. Now, just because you change the template, when that pulls it in, if it's not correct for that specific person, you can go ahead and change it at that time when you're adding before you hit save. You can change it at that time. Okay, does the position override classification value need to be set to exempt or non-exempt prior to your first payroll in January? We've mentioned this before, and it does not have to be done before your first payroll in January. However, you'll want to make sure that it's done prior to doing your W-2s for 2026, and it's also you'll want to make sure that you have those marked as soon as possible when you have the time to do that. This is a crazy time of year with W-2s going on and everybody trying to get those finished. And then your payrolls in January need to be processed. So once you can have time to breathe, then you can go back in and make those corrections. If the flags are not set, however, you want to make sure that when you're paying that overtime pay type or the blended overtime pay type for your January payrolls, that the value in current or future is set correctly. Okay. What happens in the situation where the position override classification is set properly, but the payroll payments field is left blank? So if the payroll payments in current or future has a blank, the system is going to default to whatever is on the position screen. So if your position screens are set properly, it's going to automatically pull that in. Okay, and I can show you that when I paid this Stewart, and I automatically chose overtime, this flag is being marked for me because I have it set correctly on his position screen, so it's going to default to that value. So that way it is going to be included. Okay. What happens in a situation where the position overtime classification is set properly, but oh, I just did that. Okay. Those two the same? No, they're not. Okay. All right. What happens in a situation where the position classification is not set properly, but the payment is set properly? The overtime classification field on the position record determines if the system examines the pay type, pay history, or not. So basically, if the positions is set non-exempt, then when you run your W-2s, it's going to go through and pull in any pay history that has an overtime or a blended overtime rate, and it's marked as included. If the position is excluded, it's not even going to look at the historical pay amounts. So in this case, where the position override classification is not correct when it's being paid, but you marked it as include or exclude when you paid it, you just need to go back to the position and mark it as the correct amount or the correct value. So it knows if it should look at that pay type as overtime to include it on the W-2 or not. If the position is exempt, and it should be included on the W-2, then you're going to have to put in for an adjustments. Okay. We covered this, the last section that we went over as far as a blended overtime rate. The recommended is the miscellaneous pay type be used for the one part, the straight time pay, and then the half part, the time and a half part, be put in as blended overtime. So the halftime part is going to be blended. So then that way, when the W-2s are processed, it's not going to look at that miscellaneous pay for the straight pay. It's just going to look at the BOT pay type for the half portion. How does the pay amount summary report list on overtime? So currently there's not going to be, when you're looking at your pay report and the pay amount summary report, when you're doing payroll, it's not going to break out the overtime and blended overtime. It's all going to be lumped together as overtime pay. If the OT pay type is used, how does the system report the information on the W-2s? Does the report know to report only the halftime portion? Yes, the system will properly calculate and report the halftime on the employee's W-2. That was the first example we went over, where that custodian worked 40 hours and they were paid 5 hours at time and a half. We just put it in a straight overtime for 5 hours. And the system will modify or pull out the halftime portion when it's time to run your W-2s. Can the FLSA overtime field be included and loaded using the attendance absence import option? This is another one that we just went over. Column Z is the FLSA overtime value, and that is what you need to add to your spreadsheets for your attendance load. Will the FLSA overtime field be available when using core adjustments post to future? Currently, that is not, but it's going to be an enhancement. Will the FLSA overtime field be available when using the core adjustment mass add? Yes, the mass add is in place for the ability to set the overtime flag when creating overtime BOT pay amounts. Okay, so the core attendance mass add is going to be available. Now, I don't think this JIRA issue is available at this time, but it's something the SSDT is working on and going to be adding to that screen when you're doing mass adds through the attendance screen. Okay, so one other thing that I wanted to mention here on our Fiscal website, under the links and documentation, we've added a couple of new links here. These guidelines from the Department of Labor, the overtime pay, and the wage and hour division. So these are both links that can take you to documentation that you can look at that describes this wage and hour division and overtime pay of how it's calculated and what needs to be reported and things like that. So those are available to you. And again, I just want to mention, Fiscal support does not give legal advice. And again, you can reach out to OBBBA or your own legal counsel if you have any specific questions. We hope that you found this session helpful and feeling a little more at ease with your upcoming 2026 payrolls. We're going to continue to relay any new information that we receive from the SSDT. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out to redesignhelp@metasolutions.net. Thank you, and hopefully everybody has a wonderful holiday.